Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Be Mindful podcast. We have our incredible guest today, Mr. Troy Hadeed. He is a yoga instructor and author. He is a man of many talents. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and just let them know who you are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Christoph Ashi. It is always an honor and a pleasure to share with anyone at all. I have been teaching yoga for about 15 years, practicing for a little bit longer. I just finished writing a book. I am a social entrepreneur of sorts. So some people might know in Trinidad know a store called Mystic Hemp from way back in the day. That was
Hi.
me. And then I had a recycling business and now a yoga studio. I'm now into public speaking and that kind of stuff. But I always say that for me, I just want to know that whatever I do and step into, that in some way it reminds us what it means to love one another and connects each individual to their understanding of God. And outside of that, to me, there are no labels.
I love that. I really love
Yeah.
that. And well, thank you for being here. I've been excited for this conversation for weeks. We've been planning this for weeks. But
Yeah.
you said so many things I want to jump into, but I'm going to just start with the basics and I
Yeah.
will gradually get there.
Yeah.
So, to you, in your opinion, in your perspective, what is wellness? What is well being?
Well, such a loaded question, which was simple. You know, Western medicine and the Western world, the world really, it's not really a East West thing, but in a lot of ways, it's been fed to us that the physical body, mental, emotional body, spiritual body are separate things.
Mm,
And even now, medicine today still very much treats people in that way,
right.
even though science has over and over again proven that this is not the case,
Mm,
that the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual body are all interrelated and intertwined. It's not even that they can communicate with one another and can impact one another. They don't have that choice.
right.
They have no choice but to directly impact one another. It's not optional, right? We are one whole being. We are not a being that has separate parts or separate layers to us as such.
Right.
So when you talk about mindfulness and wellness, it's important to note that wellness means emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual wellness and alignment,
Mm,
right? You can't choose to be aligned in one area of your life and not another. You can't go and eat right,
mm,
but neglect all the emotional baggage and trauma that you're carrying. Like that's not wellness, right? And a lot of the time when we talk about mindfulness, we approach mindfulness in a way as if it's something that we have to do, like it's a checkbox. People come to me all the time and say, I can't meditate
mm,
because I just can't shut my mind up.
right.
And I would say to them, well, why would you want to do that?
Exactly.
Like your mind's natural state is to create, it's to have thoughts.
Mm,
And it would be so more beneficial to approach mindfulness in the aspect of any perspective of more like creating a relationship with our mind.
right.
You
I
know, go ahead.
Beautiful. No, I was just on that thought because I know you have more to say and I'm lapping it up. But for me,
Yeah,
the first thing that I thought of, I can't remember what book, it may be Michael A. Singer's book, Untethered Soul. And I
mhm,
remember he said, it's not, you are not the mind, you are the observer of that mind. So when you're going in and saying, oh, I just want to shut those thoughts up, it's like, no, that's what you need to, that's literally like the gold that
yeah,
there that wanting to shut that down is the opposite of what you have to do. So what I've learned with my mindfulness journey, my meditation journey, was that exactly that, like changing that narrative to now shift from I don't want any thoughts in there to now let's just have beautiful and peaceful thoughts. Because when we meditate, and I'm sure we agree, when I
yeah,
meditate now, it's just that voice is so calm, it's just there like a hushed, like very much like everything, like you said, is in alignment and it
yeah.
reflects on all different levels in the playing field. So I think that's beautiful what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I love to. the way I like to describe your mind, Ashe, is that your mind is like a lover,
Right.
right? It's like a marriage,
Mm.
but there's no separation and divorce,
Right.
right? Your mind is your ride or die. It's you and your mind for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And your mind is also the most powerful thing we have,
Mm.
right? Your mind dictates our reality and our perception, our experience of life itself.
Right.
So if we look at the mind as a relationship, it's like you wouldn't come home and tell your spouse to shut up,
Yeah.
or your
You
partner to
shouldn't.
shut up. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you want is to create intimacy, right?
Yeah.
And at the foundation of intimacy is listening and understanding.
Mm.
And that is what meditation is. It's just looking at the thoughts, being with the thoughts, and just trying to understand what comes up, right? Your mind is like a partner or a child that simply wants to be heard and acknowledged.
Mm.
That's it. And if we don't spend time listening to our partner, intimately with our partner, well, naturally, your mind has to start to scream and shout to get our attention,
Right.
right? And that is where anxiety and depression and all these things come from.
It's so true.
Yeah. Are you hearing me okay? I see a little glitch.
I
Yeah.
hear you perfectly now. Yes. Hold
Yeah.
on 1 second. There was a
Yeah.
little glitch, but I'm hoping it
Yeah.
didn't pick up. It's fine. So we'll cut that. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
definitely. So I agree because for me, again, it was changing that narrative. And it's crazy. Like you said, the mind is so powerful that it can go either way. It can be positively powerful or it could be negatively powerful. And I've experienced
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've experienced both. But I always say it's like when you have duality in life, you have the good and you have the bad. And when you have those bad moments, it makes you really acknowledge and admire and appreciate the good moments. So for me, I've had a very hands-on experience with experiencing and learning both ends of the spectrum with the mind.
Yeah.
And I can tell you it's much nicer on this side than the other
Yeah.
side. So that's why with the Invisible Scars project, I really am committed to making that very clear to people because seeing both experiences, I think it's easier in hindsight when you can get to that good part and that bright part and that happy and healthy space, to acknowledge that you were in that space that was not so great. And I think that's the difficulty with mental health is like identifying it and being able to really know what's happening. But again, it comes down to knowing yourself, knowing your mind, acknowledging your thoughts and really controlling that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so beautiful to hear you say that because a lot of the time we love to give everybody flowers and rainbows, right? And
Exactly.
it's so important to acknowledge the discomfort and the
Exactly.
pain and the suffering, and even the suffering we cause for ourselves.
It's so true.
And very often, like I once spent 10 days in silence at School of Vipassana retreat.
Right.
And in a nutshell, the first half of that experience was absolutely like almost unbearable.
Right.
And there was a switch that happened about 5 days in, and that switch was that there was a guide that said something. We couldn't speak, he could speak. And whatever he said brought me to realize that all the thoughts that had been plaguing me for those 5 days were fear driven.
Right.
They were fear based, right? They sounded like girlfriend cheating on me, business going bankrupt, friends having a good time while I sat on a cushion for 10 days, all this stuff, right? And as long, once I understood
Mm.
where those thoughts were coming from,
Mm.
it's not that they didn't come back,
Right.
but I now had a relationship to them.
Right.
And I knew that was not a place I wanted to live from, and that was not a reality I wanted. So once we have a relationship to our thoughts, we could see them, we could understand them,
Mm.
and then, they don't have as much power over us as they would if we just neglected them.
Exactly. And for me, I love that you said that because for me, fear has become this thing that I'm studying in my life. And, we all have fears, and that stems from childhood. We have things that those fears are actually traumas, and those fears are things. So, for example, with me, I got bullied, And I realized as I got older, as a 23-year-old woman, I would never let that happen now. But when you're younger,
Yeah.
it's something that was instilled where you had these thought patterns that were fear driven that you don't even realize are impacting you on such a huge scale. And it's almost like it's your inner child. And this is why I stress to people inner child healing is so important, because we
Yeah.
walk around and there are big men, there are women out there who are still children at heart, who still carry these emotional traumas that almost like a child, you're like in a little ball crying up inside and you don't even know. So it definitely
Yeah.
stems from fear. And what I loved with what you said as well, which I completely agree with, was changing that dynamic now, where it doesn't, I'm not afraid of it. Now that I know what it is, it's almost like you nurture it and you just
Yeah.
be a little bit more patient and a little bit more understanding. So instead of again having that first narrative with yourself, like, why am I so this? Why am I so that? Why can't I just go out there and be confident? Why can't I just not have anxiety? Versus now saying, I see what's happening here. Come here. I
Yeah.
love you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Of
love
course.
you.
Yeah. What's so funny, and it almost seems ironic, Ashe, is that no matter what our fears are,
Mhm.
fear's greatest worry is not being loved
Mm,
or not being able to love.
right.
Even fear is driven by love.
Mm,
Fear at its very root is governed by love, you know?
that's beautiful. And love is the most powerful energy in this universe. I always
Yeah,
say it is
yeah,
the energy of God. It is the energy of divinity. And it shows just that hierarchy of the scales, how it really plays out. Because again, something so that can be seen so dark and ugly as fear, you can see has that almost childlike quality. Like you want love. You just want that love. It's
yeah,
easy to see that kind of humanizing of it, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then so for someone with anxiety or
Yeah.
depression or things like anything in life that they're going through, what did you experience, like benefits that you experienced with yoga and meditation in your everyday life? What did you see a difference and how did you see a difference? Because a lot of people I know who I spoke to, their first thing immediately is, well, I can't, how do I pay attention? How do I even sit there for this long? And how do I know I'm meditating correctly? How do I know I'm doing it right? So how do
Yeah.
you kind of gauge?
Well, the first thing I would say is you can't meditate wrong.
Right.
There's no way to do it wrong, right? It's just spending time with yourself. If there was something as wrong,
Yeah.
meditation, it might be trying to meditate with your cell phone in your hand,
Right. Right.
or in front of a computer screen. Like meditation is time with yourself.
Mhm.
That is not, there's no doing. There's you just sit and you look at your thoughts. Maybe put a time on your phone
Mm.
so you don't have to worry about how much time has passed. It feels like 4 hours, you
Right.
know?
Right.
So that's the first thing.
Mm.
And there's an amazing teaching by a yoga teacher called B.K.S. Iyengar. He's no longer in his body.
Right.
But he used to say, it's one that I really connect to. He used to say that the mind is king of everything,
Mm.
but breath is king of the mind.
Mm. Wow.
So mind dictates your entire reality, your entire experience. Even if someone were to tune into this podcast and right away decide that I was X, Y, and Z, or she was X, Y, and Z, and we had nothing to offer them, chances are they are listening to this right now. If they are still listening
Mm.
and trying to disregard everything we bring to the table and find everything that is wrong with what we have to say,
Right.
because that is the reality they created with their perception and their narrative, right? Mind is king of everything. This can be told in infinite ways,
Yeah.
but breath is the king of the mind. The
Okay.
breath is the one thing that can tame the mind.
Mm.
And this is the fundamental essence of yoga and meditation practice.
Mm.
What I tell people is, I know we think of yoga as all these postures and stuff, but yoga is not a posture. The postures are just a small part of the practice. They are tools that help us deepen our relationship to our breath and our mind.
Right.
And only when we can deepen relationship to breath and mind can we really understand what it means to live from a place of love, to dissolve this obsession with our individual identity, right? That can be a whole different for our conversation,
I know.
right?
I'm already planning for a part two because I know we have so much to even cover on
Yeah,
one episode. So much, yeah.
yeah. But deepening our relationship to breath and mind is essential, absolutely essential. If anybody actually intends to understand what it means to love one another or to quiet the voices of the mind,
Right.
right? It's essential. So I think where you're pointing me is to give some tools, right? So I'm gonna pick that up. And the first thing I would invite someone to do is just set your time on your phone, maybe, and just sit with yourself.
Right.
Just be still. You could sit on a chair. You don't have to fold your legs like some old yogi, right? Like none of that needs to happen. What one of the tips I would give though is that try to always have your hips higher than your knees.
Right. Okay.
So maybe elevate yourself on a cushion or even sit on a chair.
Right.
Because if your hips are not higher than your knees, you're gonna after time gonna start to slouch a little bit, right? It's gonna get very uncomfortable.
Right.
And when you meditate, your seated meditation should be comfortable. Your spine should be long and you should be somewhat alert, right? And anytime your mind runs off, just come back to your breath. Just follow your breath and start to lengthen your breath, but not in a forceful, aggressive way. Remember, your mind and your breath, it's like your partners, your lovers. You don't want to force, you don't want to create aggression.
Exactly.
But just to slowly start to deepen and lengthen your breath, you know. And it's so funny that we talk about breathing, but the reality is, I learned to breathe at 27 years old, 4 years after teaching yoga and decades after being an athlete or whatever, and we assume that we know how to breathe. The reality is that we do not.
Right.
99% of us do not know how to breathe,
I
right?
can definitely say I don't know how to breathe properly. I know
So,
I don't. I need to figure it out because, yeah, I know I
yeah. So I'm gonna share that with you
don't.
and the listeners now, and hopefully while it can be again a 4 hour workshop, maybe just a little snippet could change our understanding of it, right? And what I like to say is, sure, you come out of the womb and breath comes into us. And some of us have lived there decades breathing. So we're like, what is he talking about? I know how to breathe. Well, breath is like life. And you can sit on your couch and eat potato chips for decades. You're still living. But to live and live with intention is different.
True.
Same thing with breath.
Very
To
true.
breathe and breathe in relationship to breath with intention, it's two completely different things, right? So the first question I would ask you, it's important now, you know, we want to understand, well, at least glimpse, how do we breathe?
Yeah.
Because if we can breathe properly, then the mind gets quieter as long as we sit with the mind and the breath. So the first question I'll ask you, Ashi, is when you inhale, do you pull air into your body? I would have said that too, and most listeners would agree with you.
I felt
That's not actually how you.
I
Yeah,
felt
you felt it was a. Don't worry, it was a trick question. It was you were baited, right? You were baited. Um, that's not actually how breath happens.
right.
And the understanding of how breath happens is an absolute game changer. And I want to make clear this is not some yoga, meditation, mumbo jumbo. This is the actual anatomy of breath,
Right.
simply told with different words, right? So here's how breath happens. I'm sure some of us have heard that we breathe into our belly, right? I'm going to flip your screen here. That we breathe down into our belly. But actually, air can't get into our belly That's not possible unless somebody punctured your belly or your abdominal cavity somehow, right? The reason our belly expands when we breathe is because our diaphragm descends into our abdominal cavity, right? And the abdominal cavity is like a water balloon. So when the diaphragm descends, the belly appears to be bulging, right? But what we need to acknowledge is where breath happens is in our thoracic cavity. And for listeners that might not have a visual, your thoracic cavity is from your diaphragm just under your rib cage. And then it includes your rib cage right up to your chest and your sternum and even your back body. We don't often think of breathing into our back, but that's breath also, we can also breathe into our back, right? So think of your thoracic cavity like a box. And inside this box has a set air pressure.
Right.
Now, what happens when you increase the volume of a box is that the air pressure inside of it decreases.
Right.
Right? And in Trinidad, how I love to describe that is that if we had 200 people in a 10 by 10 room for a party,
right,
we would all be really tight. We would have no room to move. But if you expanded that room to 30 by 30, all of a sudden there's less pressure. We have more room to move, right? So volume and air pressure are inversely related.
Right.
When you increase volume, you decrease air pressure. And I know I'm taking people back to physics class, but I think it's easy for them to understand. It's basic. Now, the other rule of nature that we need to understand is that air pressure moves from high to low.
Right.
Gases move from high pressure to low pressure. So I'm going to connect some dots quickly here, right? Your thoracic cavity is a box.
Right.
When your diaphragm descends into your belly and your rib cage expands and your chest lifts and your back body expands, what you're doing is increasing the volume of your thoracic cavity. When you do that, the air pressure inside of you decreases, which now means that the air pressure outside of you is higher than the air pressure inside of you.
Right.
So that air moves inside of you to create balance or equilibrium, right? So how I like to describe breath is that it's not that we're pulling air into us. It's like we're giving somebody a hug. We're opening our arms and allowing the breath to step in. So we aren't actually breathing. We are creating space to be breathed by an external force.
That is beautiful. That is a beautiful
right?
perspective. Really.
Yeah. And then you can go further and acknowledge that if same force breathing me, it's the same force breathing you. You know, and breath is the one thing that connects every living being on the planet. It connects us more than DNA, ancestry, opinion, where we're from, any of it. And what I often like to point out in this discussion before I toss it back over to you is acknowledging and learning how the anatomy of breath worked for me was a game changer in my yoga practice, my meditation practice, and my life. What changed that game even further was discovering that the word spirit, like Holy Spirit or God, that whatever someone understood that to be, that the word spirit comes from the Latin word spiritus, and it means to breathe.
Wow.
So for me, it connected so many dots in how that landed for me is that God or spirit was making love to me every time I breathed.
Wow.
Choosing to be inside of me, you know.
That is beautiful. My paws just raised. That's a beautiful way to say it because, again, like you said, no matter what social class, what race, what ethnicity, what nationality, whatever the case is, that's the one thing, like you said, that connects us. If we really go back to primal kind of days where nothing, no social media, nothing. That was it, just
Yeah.
connection. And that's when we appreciated it even more because we didn't have
Yeah.
any distractions. We had that reality of this is what we were all given by God or something bigger, whatever your belief system is.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's beautiful that you expressed it that really, really great. I can't even, you should host. You
Yeah.
should
Yeah. No,
take my
hosting,
job.
hosting, Ashay, is far too much work for me. And for your listeners who don't realize, like, just to let you guys know what it takes to host a podcast and then go and edit these episodes and commit to producing them and booking hosts. It's not an easy job. So Ashay,
Thank
I
you.
don't want it. I'm really
You're
sorry.
like,
No, I'll come back on your show as often as you want me and will
yes.
have me,
Well,
but
please.
I have no desire to host a show.
I would really, really love you back on because we actually have a 10-minute mark left. So I think
Yeah,
what we'll do after this, we'll talk and we'll plan a next one. But maybe let's just tie this back into mental health to end this
yeah,
episode. For me, like I told you off camera, finding my breath, finding my center, finding my spirituality has completely changed my life. When
yeah,
people ask me, what is the one thing you cherish more than anything? I say my spirituality. And that's such a broad word to just encapsulate everything, which is just that connection to something bigger than you. And for me, when I speak about this project and I spoke about the wellness aspect of it and wanting to kind of push that narrative more, it's because I've seen real life results connected from meditation and yoga to better mental health. 100%. I've seen it.
yeah,
And there are a lot of studies happening now with children, specifically in Toronto. I've seen studies where they started putting instilling programs in schools for meditation classes instead of detention and punishment. They send
yeah,
unruly children to meditation, and they're seeing real life results because if you go deeper into the study, they're speaking about in specific areas in these cities. These kids are coming from homes with a lot of trauma, a lot of built up aggression, some of them being abused, some of them experiencing very ugly things, like we said in the beginning of the podcast, that
hmm,
darkness. So I think when we lead with compassion, especially for young ones, to say, okay, let's take a moment to see why you're acting like this. Let's not judge why
yeah,
you're acting like this. Let's find out why. And they go within themselves and they have that moment of recentering, and they're seeing real life results that even reflect better schools and better grades in school, better relationships among the children. And I think that's like a microcosm for what the macrocosm could be, our society could be, if we all just prioritize breath and meditation and centering and just self and connection to all and that interconnectivity. So
yeah,
we covered most of that, which I'm a big believer in it, and I'm seeing real results on a personal level and reading up on it as well. So I'm really happy to have you on, and I hope that we all learned something today. I'm sure we did. I just learned that
yeah,
I don't breathe properly. So that's something we need to work on for sure on the next
yeah,
episode.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for that. If you would like to tell them any last thoughts before we wrap up, please feel free to tell them. Guys, he will be back. I promise he will be back.
Yeah, I will just say to listeners that it's really important to cultivate this relationship to mind and breath, right? It gives us the ability, one, a relationship to breath to me will 100% deepen someone's relationship to God.
Yeah.
Whatever they view that divine agency to be,
Mm.
it will deepen that relationship. And a relationship to their mind will give them this space to respond to life more consciously rather than reacting emotionally, which is so important. And for anyone experiencing any form of anxiety or depression or stress, we often like to medicate a lot. And sometimes medication is necessary. I'm not bashing it,
Sometimes.
but there are tools like meditation and breath that can shift
Mhm.
our entire relationship to everything we experience.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah,
Something crossed my mind when you said that. but I forgot it. So don't worry.
Yeah, it'll come back. It'll
We'll
come
come
back.
back to the next episode.
Yeah, and I would say we live in a culture, we've spoken about darkness so much, right? Today we mentioned it a few times. And we live in a culture that is filled with avoidance and neglect.
Yes.
And it's important to acknowledge that the only way to turn darkness to light is to step into darkness and flick on a switch, right? If you neglect it, that darkness just gets denser and stuffier and it begins to stifle you. So it's so important that we commit to just sitting with it and being in relationship to it.
Again, not being afraid of it.
Yeah.
Just embracing it and just being like, all right, this is it. And then that light, darkness never survives in the presence of light. One of my favorite quotes, because it's so true. It's literally true. Once you have a light in the room, there's no darkness. So you are that light. You are that.
Here's another perspective on that, Ashi. And again, we could go on and on and on and on. But this is coming from, last year, I just spent prolonged periods in absolute solitary darkness, voluntarily.
Yes.
And I wasn't kidnapped or anything. And one of the things I discovered was that there is light in darkness. The light was actually born out of darkness. And we can take that however we like and spin a perspective on it. But it's important to note that before there was anything that we call light, there was darkness, and that light was born out of darkness.
Food for thought. Thanks for leaving us on that note. Because it's a beautiful way to wrap up. So guys, thank you so much, Troy. Thank you so much for being on this. This was a beautiful, beautiful episode, and we look forward to you coming back. And guys, if you want to follow him, all his information will be in the description below. Thank you for tuning in to the Be Mindful podcast, where we will see you next week, Tuesday. Bye.
Love. Bye.